And we are live. Hi, my name is Dave, and I will be your host for tonight's event, which is Summits in Starlight, Astro, and Adventure Photography with Canon R-Series cameras and Paul Zizka. But first, this is a very special promotion because this is part of our TCSTV Live, because it's part of Camera Store's 25th anniversary. We've been around for 25 years. That's something to say in the retail world, especially surviving COVID and everything else that we're going through here. So if you want to check out Canon cameras, check out thecamerastore.com. And also, if you're shopping for anything else photography related, check out our website. Tons and tons of stuff and some really good deals going on as well. And also, if you have registered for this event, we are going to send you an email with some very special promos that we can't talk about here, but you can certainly get that email and you'll get some cool offers. But if you haven't registered for this event, you still can get those offers. You just need to email Evelyn. It's Evelyn@thecamerastore.com. It's EVELYN at thecamerastore.com, and she will send you the links for those. And we're also having a book sale. Paul Zizka's got some amazing books, and we are having a 20% off sale of all of Paul's books that are in the store. There's a few of them behind me as we speak here. We also have a bunch of people working behind the scenes to make me look as good as I am right now, and to make Paul look fantastic, even though he has a much better background than I do. We have got Gary and Drew, and of course Riley is monitoring our social media behind the scenes here. And this is what I love about live streaming, is that it's interactive. So Paul's going to have an amazing presentation here. He is a fantastic photographer with some great photos. But we're going to be monitoring the chat room for questions, and because we're going to have a very cool question and answer period after his presentation. So make sure you put your questions in there. I'm going to be monitoring that, and I'm going to compile a bunch of the best questions and ask Paul about them after we're done there. And if you're not in the chat room yourself, you are more than welcome to email me, because I'm really kind of lonely sometimes. Send me an email at dave@thecamerastore.com, and I will do my best to get through as many questions as I can after the presentation. So, if you're not already familiar with our guest tonight, Paul Zizka is known for his unique style that brings together the grandeur of landscapes with surprising elements. Zizka's images will leave you enthralled and inspired to add a dose of adventure to your photography. Welcome, Paul. How are you doing tonight?
I'm very good. Thanks for the intro, Dave. I'm fired up to be here.
Well, that's good. So we're really looking forward to this. Every time I mention, I'm talking to Paul tonight, people are like, "Oh, Paul, he's amazing." So hope you're doing okay. You're staying warm. I heard you're just out in the bush recently. You just got back?
Yeah, I just got back from one of those multi-season trips where you encounter a little bit of everything. It's that time of year in the Rockies, which makes things very exciting from a photography standpoint. Gives you a lot to work with. If you're willing to put up with the elements, then you're likely to come home with a few shots that you like. So yeah, it's a good adventure.
Oh yeah, no, it's amazing. We were like plus 19 or 20 here today, but you had snow yesterday, just an hour away from Calgary.
Oh yeah, we got pummeled, and it all melted overnight, and we descended among the most beautiful fall colors in Cape Country. It's fantastic. So I think I know a lot of my fellow local photographers. This is what they live for. This is the time of year that they wait for months, and they're going to be getting after it over the next couple of weeks. It's very special.
Oh yeah, when the leaves start to turn here, and what people don't realize that fall is a very short season here, right? The leaves don't stick around very long like they do out east. So it's just a madhouse to get some great quality images. So it's very cool. So I know I'm excited to get into your presentation. I've seen some of your photos already, and they're amazing. So let's get into it.
Fantastic. Let's just share the screen here. Here we go. All right. Excellent. I'm so excited, guys. Thanks for spending the evening with me. Good evening, everyone. I realize you always have choices on a Saturday night. So there's always a few events to compete with. So I appreciate you being here with us. I want to thank Canon and the Camera Store for giving me the opportunity to share with you a few of my passions tonight, including astro photography or night photography and adventure photography. It's always a pleasure to be able to connect with fellow photographers through the power of technology. I hope there's people from all over the place here tonight. I hope we get a great turnout. I also want to wish the Camera Store a happy 25th anniversary. It's been amazing. Over the years, every time I have to deal with a Camera Store for one reason or another, It honestly has always been a pleasure. And so thanks for everything that you do for the community, and just keep it up, guys. It's great. It's been wonderful to see several friends and fellow photographers being featured as presenters as part of the festivities. I've really enjoyed the show, and I'm sure a lot of you have too. So let me hop into this now. Summits and Starlight, Astro and Adventure Photography in the Canadian Rockies with a Canon R mirrorless system. Perhaps before I jump in, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. So I was born and raised in Quebec City. I've been living in Banff, however, for 12 plus years now, which seems crazy. But I essentially swapped the Chateau Frontenac and the St. Lawrence River for Mount Rundle and Two Jack Lake. So swapped a couple icons for a couple other icons. And now I live in Banff with my crew, my family, that my wife Megan, and our two daughters who are 3 and 8. So they're a little bit older than this photo shows now. So this is the family at Lake Oisa on one of those days where you get all seasons in one day in the Rockies. Always exciting. And usually my year looks in terms of work as a photographer, my year looks very, very different from what I've experienced, of course, over the last couple of years. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate. In normal times, a lot of my adventure, a lot of my nighttime photography takes me abroad, which I'm very, very thankful for. I spend a good portion of every year documenting remote, wild places outside of Canada. As much as I love my backyard, I'm very thankful for those opportunities. This is a self-portrait taken on the Greenland ice sheet a couple of years ago. Now, for obvious reasons, over the last 18 months or so, that hasn't been possible. Thankfully, I feel like we live in one, and same for the folks who are just, in a Calgary area, in the cities that border the Canadian Rockies. We live in or close to one of the most amazing backyards in the world and one of the most inspiring playgrounds for photography. And so over the last year, my efforts instead have been focused on exploring locally and essentially fill in the gaps on the map. No matter how much you feel you've gotten out over the years, there's always more to see. Of course, the Rockies are huge. And I feel like for me, the list keeps getting longer. The more I get out, the more I come back with ideas of places to go and places I want to revisit. So this is a nighttime telephoto shot of Mount Rundle, which is, of course, one of the most photographed mountains in Canada. It's the mountain that looms above our house. It's a constant presence here in Banff, and it's an icon that visitors from all over the world have marveled at for many, many years. And so this evening, I also want to take this opportunity to showcase my backyard, the Canadian Rockies, which I'm very, very proud of. Not only that, but I also want to take this opportunity tonight to talk to you about the RF system. And also I want to take the opportunity to slow things right down. A lot of us consume photography through social media now. And social media has been amazing for us photographers for so many reasons. But one of the downsides is that we consume photography at such an incredibly rapid rate through extremely fast scrolling. And that means there's rarely any time to talk about what went into an image. What was the approach? What was the thinking process? What was the story behind the making of an image? And tonight is a great opportunity to get into that, to slow things right down and talk about the process behind the images. Before I begin, I want to talk about gear a little bit. Because I know some of you will be wondering. So all of the images tonight that you're about to see were taken with the R5, the Canon R5. As a Canon ambassador, I was able to get out with the R5 early last year. And so in the meantime, since then, I've put it through its paces in the mountains. I feel like I've put it through a lot. And so I'm excited to share the highlights of my wanderings with the R5 this evening. And so as far as the glass goes, let's hop into glass now. As far as the glass goes, all of the images that you're about to see were taken with the lenses that you see right there. So the RF 7200, f2.8 LIS, then the Coke, the pop can equivalent, the f4 equivalent, which is amazing, the RF 7200 f4, then the big gun, RF 100 to 500, the RF 1535, which is the equivalent of the wide angle lenses that have been my workhorse since I started in photography. So a lot of images you're going to see tonight were taken with the 1535 f2.8. And I'm also going to show some images that were taken with the EF 1635 f2.8 version 3. And you'll notice that the last lens is an EF lens. And I really wanted to highlight that because I get a lot of questions regarding transition from the EF to the RF system. I think it's important for people to realize that migrating from one system to another doesn't need to be done overnight. You know, that transition I know is daunting to a lot of people, particularly from a financial standpoint, from a financial perspective. The good news is that the transition doesn't have to happen all at once, thanks to the truly amazing adapters that Canon has created. And so you can do that transition if you're on the fence or if you're just concerned about the financial side of things. Know that you can make that transition to the mirrorless system gradually over a long time span, one lens at a time. I've spent a lot of time over the last couple years testing out the adapters, and I can guarantee you're not going to be compromising image quality by adding an adapter. I know when you add an element to the system, there's always a concern that there's going to be a loss in quality. I'm including these two images that were taken with the 1635, and I took the same images with the 1535 mirrorless equivalent, because on those 2 days, I really wanted to do some comparison and some thorough testing. And I can tell you, you'd be hard pressed to see the difference in quality. So all that to say that you can really hold on to the advantages that you get from your trusty EF glass that you've been using over the years, that's been your workhorse, by using the adapters. And in one at a time, you can switch to, you can acquire some of the new glass that Canon has made available. All right, now let's really dig into the images. So I want to share this one because this was the first ever image that I created with the R5. It's an image of Cascade Falls in Banff National Park. A lot of you no doubt will be familiar with this location. Most likely you've seen it from the reversed angle, where you might have been driving from Canmore to Banff, and you saw the Cascade, beautiful Cascade, coming down the side of Cascade Mountain, directly in front of your vehicle. It's a really stunning sight. And it looks just amazing from the top looking down. And this is a location that I'd visited multiple times during the day, because there's a couple climbs that take you to the top of the falls. And every time I thought, oh, I should really come back at night, because it would really offer opportunities for another, just as stunning images as you could get during the day. And this composition was kind of set in stone much earlier. I walked past the falls and I saw the notch there with Mount Rundle and the Trans-Canada, and I thought, wow, this is a stunning sort of, sometimes in nature, you just wander around and you're sort of given, Mother Nature will just hand over to you those really cool compositions. And that was one of them, I thought. And so what I did is when I got the gear from Canon, is I called up my friend Mike, who's a mountain guide in Canmore, who's a very talented climber and who I've worked with a lot over the years. And I said, Mike, I've got this new gear that I need to put through my process, my usual process. And I was wondering if you'd like to be part of an image, if you'd like to help me create something together. That would involve night photography and also adventure photography. Mike's always up for anything. So he said, sure, let me know when to meet and where, and I'll be there. So we met at sunset at the Cascade Falls parking lot. We did a multi-pitch climb at sunset that spat us at the top of the falls. And then I told Mike, okay, this is sort of this is the vision. The falls lead into the image, draw the eye in towards the Trans-Canada, but I really want a human element to convey a sense of vulnerability and sense of scale as well. And so I was thinking maybe you could hop over to that left side so that it would balance out the composition in terms of, Mount Rundle carries a lot of visual weight on the right, but I'm missing something on the left. Mike said, no problem. He hopped over there. It was very, very windy, so communication was an issue, but and what was the first hurdle we had to deal with. So there was a lot of yelling. Eventually, we ended up just calling each other. So we were on the phone for quite some time. Another issue I faced was just trying to figure out the lighting that would highlight Mike as best as possible. Now you can see he's quite small in the frame over on the left there. I needed to find a way of lighting him that would ensure that the observer wouldn't miss him altogether, because he was a key part of my story. So we ended up with this backlighting, and this was such a great first experience with the R5 because it allowed me to test out the low light capabilities, allowed me to test out how easy the transition would be from the 5D Mark IV to the R5, which was actually seamless, very, very quick, very easy. So already everything was where I expected it to be on the body in terms of features and settings. So I was able to put the shot together rather quickly. And then also I ended up testing the waterproofing as well, because it was so windy. Once in a while, the waterfall would blow back in my face and I would just have to, just wipe the lens, etc. So it was a good night to really test out several of the features that I was looking forward to in the new R5. I felt a little bit silly at times standing in the creek with my tripod perched close to the edge with, carrying a camera. That there weren't too many R5s floating around back then. And so, and Canon, of course, had, put their trust in me to get some images, but already I found myself gambling a little bit with conditions on night one, but everything went really well in the end. We got an image that we felt was compelling, that we both really liked, that we were proud to share with the world and with Canon. So this was my first experience with the R5. So for the techie folks out there, this was shot with the RF 1535 at f2.8, and it's 3 shots, focus stacked, 30-second exposure, ISO 1600. All right, moving on to another image, one of my favorite images from last year. This, some of you will recognize Comet Neowise on the left side of the frame there. This is a self-portrait taken up on Sulphur Mountain, a few hundred meters above our house, basically. And that's the town side of Banff on the right. Bottom left, you have Vermilion Lakes, famous Vermilion Lakes, and Cascade Mountain as the centerpiece. I do a lot of astrophotography. So of course, as soon as I got the R5, I was really excited to see how it performed at high ISO. And for several nights, we were very fortunate that for several nights, we had cloudless conditions in the Rockies, which allowed me to go out and shoot Comet Neowise 3 or 4 nights in a row. And so I was already aware of where the comet would be in the sky. And that night, I was particularly excited because the aurora forecast, the aurora data looked very, very, very favorable. The solar data looked favorable to the appearance of northern lights. And so I sort of dropped what I was doing. I ran out of the house and I walked up to this spot, which I had spotted earlier in the summer. And I set up this composition, which I'd already envisioned because I'd already made sure that I could get to the spot safely in the daytime. I knew exactly where Comet Neowise would be, but then my efforts were very much rewarded when the aurora showed up 10-15 minutes after I arrived. Not only that, but noctilucent clouds as well, which is another really cool celestial phenomenon. You can see the noctilucent clouds under the comet. So to be able to not only witness, but be able to capture an image of this crazy celestial trifecta was pretty special to me, especially with my hometown in the foreground. And then I really wanted to include the human element to give the image a bit more of a dreamy feel and to include a little bit more, to add a bit of depth to the image. So this was one of my favorite images of 2020. And this image was shot at ISO 3200, and I shot several images at ISO 6400. So when we shoot the aurora, often as photographers, we like to shoot as fast as we can in order to maximize, in order to retain the structure in the curtains as they're moving. And so it's a lot of the aurora photographers will be thrilled to see that they can now, without hesitation, push the ISO to 6400 and beyond in order to freeze the aurora as much as possible. So now I just want to show you 10 or so more images quickly that were taken at high ISO with the R5, and the vast majority of them were taken with the 1535 lens. This is a well-known scene from Bow Lake. This is focus stack. This is shot at 6400. This is a shot taken at Goat Pond in Kananaskis country. This was the beginning. This was shot, I think, let me check my notes, November 1st, last year. Last year, for those who are not aware, was a crop year for wild ice skating. The lakes froze, flash froze. We got early cold snaps, and then the snow took its sweet time to arrive. And so we had a wonderful window all over the Rockies, from Jasper to down to Kananaskis, where the lakes were just prime for skating. The quality of the ice was incredible, and it was completely transparent. And because Goat Pond is a man-made lake, there's a lot of those ghostly stumps that are under your feet as you skate, and it's so surreal in the daytime to just float above those that ancient forest. And when you go back at night, it takes the surreal factor up a notch. So we stuck around till nighttime. I asked my friend Danielle if she would model for the shot. She did really good at holding the pose. This was put together with 5 shots, focus stacked. The settings are the same in all the shots. I used 2 light sources, one pointing straight down to light up the old forest, the ancient forest, to bring out that creepy stump that I really liked as a foreground. And I used the light source that pointed towards the waist of Danielle to give her sort of some rim light so that she would be separated from my background. So one of the more, I think, maybe creative shots that I took last year. And you can see the peaks of Kananaskis Range lit up by moonlight actually in the background. Couple more shots. This is my friend Chris at Lake Minnewanka. Again, the ice skating season that kept on giving. We got aurora one night. We rushed out to the lake, found a foreground that I liked, and then same idea, used accessory lighting. I actually used a flash in this one to bring out Chris and to make him stand out from the dark background. Otherwise, the image would have just fallen apart. And then I'll use one of those lume cubes to evenly light up the foreground and really bring out that X shape. And then the aurora kept going just for long enough for us to get the shot. Couple more night shots. This was a really peculiar feature found at Abraham Lake. You're never disappointed when you go to Abraham Lake, regardless of the time of year. There's always something that will surprise you, that would get you really, really excited creatively. This was just this chunk of ice resting on a stump right in the middle of the lake when the rest of the ice level had sunk down because the lake levels had been lowered. So it was just freestanding there. It was amazing. And it's a good size. It was like person size. It was a good size chunk of ice. And then fortunate with timing to get Orion above the mountains in the background. So just some examples of what you can create with the low light capabilities of the R5 and a little accessory lighting and just playing around with different ideas. Here's another, of course, everybody here, I'm sure, is familiar with the famous methane bubbles found all over the Rockies. This is Lake Minnewanka during a really, really intense aurora display. And I just brought out the foreground with my phone actually in this one, just brought out that sort of 3D effect that the bubbles can have. Another example of the types of scenes that you can get when you shoot super wide at 15 with the Canon 1535. For this one, we lowered a light source on a rope down into Marble Canyon to bring out the blue that you see in the daytime, but that gets lost at night. And so that's where the color comes from. And those snow pillows were just amazing when lit up from underneath. Couple more shots taken at night with a 1535, just some Raven tracks leading into Mount Rundle and Orion. This is not an astro image per se, but it's a very low light image. This is my friend Lizzie Gadd, who's a wicked photographer. We went to Rat's Nest Cave, and she's an incredible model as well. And we played around with different light sources, and it was just really cool to test the R5 in an environment like that, where it's damp, it's tricky, the terrain is uneven. There's a lot that works against you, and it was pretty cool to come up with an image that we both liked in the end. All right, now I want to talk about another feature that's really served me well over the last year and a half, and that is the in-camera focus bracketing, which is, I believe, a new feature with the R5. And I want to introduce that feature by showing you more of a traditional landscape shot. This is a sunrise at Abraham Lake. Traditional in the sense that, it's a classic composition where you got the sunburst in the back with a strong skyline and a foreground element that carries a lot of visual weight. That day we skated the length of Abraham Lake. That was the plan for the day. I think it's 35 kilometers, something like that. And we thought, well, why don't we go early, and then we can shoot sunrise, and then we can just lace them up and skate the length of the lake and see how far we can go. And traditionally, the way that I would have shot this is on a tripod, and I would have manually bracketed the focus so that I get this amazing sharpness from foreground all the way to the mountains at the back. Now, this time around with the R5, I was able to use an approach that is much, much less time consuming. So let me tell you a little bit about it. What I did is I used the focus bracketing feature in the R5, which allows me to automate focus stacking. Focus stacking used to be a little more tedious, used to require a lot of care in the field so that you end up with all the files that you need to basically end up with composite your maximum sharpness in post. You used to have to do that manually. Now with the automation, makes things super, super quick. And then I paired that feature with the incredible image stabilization that the R5 gives me in order to forego the tripod altogether. So I ditched the tripod, and then I was able to use the in-camera focus bracketing in order to get all my slices of sharpness within a second, when in the past it would have been like a 1 or 2 minute process. And times of the essence when the sun is rising quickly in the sky and you want to end up with an image that is believable, so you kind of have to act pretty quickly in order to keep the angle of light the same. And I really wanted to get the first light on this chunk of ice, and I didn't want any light really on the surrounding bubble foreground, so that I could get that really cool contrast. So just handheld in focus camera bracketing, shot this at f/22, 1/50th of a second. The camera determined that I needed 8 shots for the focus bracketing. And so I ended up with the 8 raw files that I needed to put the shot together in post. So super efficient in the field. Let me show you a couple more examples where I use the in-camera focus bracketing. This was a really exciting day. Every landscape photographer has ice caves pretty high on their list of subjects, right? Ice caves are always exciting places to explore. They always give you a lot to work with. They're very exhilarating places to shoot. So are methane bubbles, of course. Now, that day we found both in one scene, which turned us, of course, into 5-year-old kids and screaming and running around. We were so fired up about finding both incredible natural phenomena in just one shot. And so the way that I decided to incorporate those two elements was with the self-portrait. And so what I did for this one is I used another feature that I haven't mentioned yet, which is the built-in intervalometer. So I used the built-in intervalometer in order to capture myself in that spot, because it was more than 10 seconds away. I couldn't get there in time to just use the 10-second timer. So I just used the intervalometer, captured the shot with me in it, then kept everything the same, all the settings the same, composition the same, simply returned to the camera, then use the in-camera focus bracketing to capture the remainder of my foreground and make sure that I went home with the best sharpness that I could. And then it was just a matter of stacking the shots in Photoshop. So actually really, really quick, just a couple of minutes in post. So this self-portrait from the Saskatchewan Glacier. And then we stuck around and we played around with different ideas. This is, again, my friend Chris, is the same cave, believe it or not, but that's from the outside looking in. And so waiting until nighttime really provided us, I find in general, tends to provide the photographers with a whole gamut of new photo ops and a whole new canvas to work with, despite the fact the location may be the same. And so suddenly everything is new again, everything is exciting again. So we just waited till nightfall, worked with different kinds of lighting and try to bring out the scale of destruction, try to merge the worlds of the starry skies and the subglacial world. And this was, I just want to show you one more image from that night, which for me actually was probably my favorite image of the night. And the main reason was that for me, it was something different from an ice cave location. I felt like I'd been to a lot of ice caves that season at that point, and I felt like I was kind of getting, when you get to a point where you're kind of microwaving the same ideas and you're not engaging creatively with the location nearly as much because you're kind of just gravitating towards the shots that come easily to you, or not easily, but that's just that you see, your eye sees first, that your brain recognizes first. And then at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to get away from those safer shots, or at least the shots are safer to me, and try to get something that is a little bit out of my comfort zone. And I was wandering around during the day and I climbed a mound of snow and I saw this scene, the daytime equivalent. And I thought, wow, that looks kind of like one of those over under scenes that you take with the underwater housing, where you really merge the two worlds together. And I thought, I got to come back at night because that cornice, the way it just bends down and defies gravity, was just wicked. And so I went back at night, put together the self-portrait, placed the light. Actually, I had help. I had a friend that I was directing, that was positioning the light properly underneath so I wouldn't blow out any elements and I would get the detail that I wanted. And then I just went around and then I went to the top of the ice to create what I hope would be a mind-bending image from the ice cave. And I really, really liked the result. And I framed myself in the Milky Way, which I'm going to admit was sheer luck. I wasn't planning on that at all. And sometimes just you get out there, you get lucky. All right. I want to share with you an image that, again, was taken with the 1530. So you can see that if you use the 1635 by Canon and you love the sunburst, rest assured it's just as good with the 1535. That sunburst is legendary. And so this is what it looks like in the 1535. So we wanted to create an image. This is my friend Dustin. We wanted to create an image that would show winter and kind of summer at the same time. So our window of opportunity was very short for this shot because, of course, if the creek is flowing, the ice curtains don't have too much time left in them. And so to pull off a shot like this safely, you have to just keep an eye on conditions. And then when it's go time, it's go time. You drop everything and you go for it. And so I met my friend Dustin that evening at the gallery at Klein River. And he is a wicked climber. And he took care of the technical side of things. And then I went there now the R5 is not that waterproof. So I went there with the underwater housing and I really wanted to bring out the turquoise sort of summery hues of the river. I was really pleased with how colorful the accompanying rocks, the boulders on the riverbed were. And then at the top, I wanted a winter world. I wanted, a place that still looks very inhospitable and harsh. And I'm going to be honest, I really lucked out with the sunburst. When we arrived in location, we realized, holy smokes, if we just wait 30 minutes, the sun's going to show up just in the right spot. So get ready, Dustin. I'm going to yell when the sun just crests the horizon, because that's when the shape is at its best. This is the shape that this is the body, this is the pose you're going to go with, and just hold it. And I'm going to fire off a flurry of shots, and hopefully one of them will work out. And so this is 2 shots shot at f16, just to stack focus, just to get some detail in the foreground. So I focused on the Dustin, and then quickly focused on the foreground, and then merged the 2 shots together to get an image that I really that we both really value and we both really like. It's really cool when you shoot with models and they're just as excited as you are about the image. I want to show you a couple more examples of times I use the in-camera focus bracketing in order to maximize sharpness in my shot. This is Moraine Lake, very early in the season when the ice has got sort of that Swiss cheese look. It looks like the high Himalaya or something. It's actually one of the easiest peaks in the Rockies, just from the top of Howling Peak. On a very dramatic day, I went up there with my dad, and that Cornice foreground and Mount Lawrence grassy was just going nuts in the background. And I was able to get this super quick with the in-camera focus bracketing, just managing to get my sharpness maximized because the clouds were moving, swirling around really, really quickly. Time was of the essence. So it was really nice to be able to automate that process. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about weatherproofing, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds. I mean, any of you work in the Rockies probably get hammered with snow or rain or wind on a regular basis. And if you're like me, you like to spend time on the edge of weather system, and you don't like to put the camera away when the drama happens. When on the edge of bad weather, that's when a lot of good photos can be taken. That's when a lot of good photos happen. You don't want to have to put away the gear because you're concerned about how it's going to react to the elements. So in the summertime, I usually turn my attention to mountaineering. I absolutely love mountaineering for so many reasons, but from a photographer's standpoint, I find it really offers so many possibilities. There's different kinds of terrain. You're always where the dynamic weather, where the drama is happening. You're in the heart of the action. You get those fresh, elevated perspectives, and you're in the right spot when the light is good. So there's really smorgasbord of opportunities that come with doing mountaineering in the Rockies. And mountaineering is also the perfect testing ground for things like weatherproofing and durability. And so I was excited to see how the camera would do in those types of situations. You know, I think there's a little bit of, I know that myself, I felt like there's a little bit of a stigma regarding weatherproofing and the durability of mirrorless cameras. Like there was a stigma around, there was something going around about mirrorless cameras maybe being flimsy compared to their DSLR counterparts. And so I really wanted to see if I could debunk that for myself, if you will. I don't like to babysit my gear. I'm very bad, to be honest, I'm very bad at taking care of my gear, at doing proper maintenance. I get home and I chuck it in a corner and I pick it up the next day when it's time to go. And in the field, I'll keep it out, pretty much through anything, because that's when the magic happened. And that day, we went up the north face of Mount Sunwapta, couldn't see a thing. I was a little bit bummed out. I was hoping to get some epic images on the more inhospitable side of the mountain. Then we flipped onto the scramble side of the mountain, the south side, and we were greeted with, and there was amazing views, super dynamic. You can see Mount Athabasca, Columbia ice field in the background, and the scenes, the compositions were just changing every second. It was amazing. And so the snow would come in and out. And so it was so nice to be able to keep the camera out. And at that point, I didn't really know. In hindsight, now it's nice to know that you can keep the camera out in those moments where the weather comes in and out, to be able to catch those kinds of moments, right? This moment, this is my friend Jesse, this moment, 10 seconds prior, Jesse had peaks behind him and the shot was just not nearly as strong. 10 seconds later, all the peaks were obscured. right? So you have a very short window of opportunity where you have the peaks that are visible on the right, yet your subject on the left is framed against a very, very clean backdrop. And you can't dig into the gear because you were worried and you had to put it away. You got to be ready. So that's when it comes in really handy to have the durability and the weatherproofing abilities. Here's another example. This is my daughter Maya in a snow cave that we found actually just a couple weeks ago. And those places are damp and you can, you're sort of bumping your stuff. Gear bend, it's the kind of place that gear gets banged up quite a bit. It's uneven terrain, everything moves. And so it's the kind of place where you want to go in there with confidence in your gear that it can handle the terrain, because there's amazing images to be created in those types of locations. All right, now another feature, one last, I think, feature I have to mention is the in-body image stabilization, because now we're talking about 5 stops. So that's really a game changer. And that's not even including the stabilization that you get with the lenses when you add the RF lenses, because you can get a couple extra, I think up to 8 stops, something like that. That's a ridiculous amount of stabilization. So what that means for an adventure photographer or nighttime photographer or landscape photographer is, well, more sharpness for one, and of course, a lot more breathing room when it comes to settings, right? There's scenes that, sometimes as a photographer, you can't have it all when it comes to settings. You can get the shutter speed where you want it, but you have to give up on your ideal idea of where the aperture and the ISO should be at. Or you choose the ISO and you put it exactly where you want, but you can't really have the other 2 parameters where you want them. Well, with 8 stops or 5 stops of stabilization, that gives you a huge amount of freedom. That means you can increase the depth of field, you can lower your ISO quite a bit, you can increase your shutter speed, stuff that you couldn't do before. And also, when it comes to low light, and a lot of, if you do adventure work or landscape photography in the Rockies, you know that the best light happens early and late in the day, and you don't have a lot of light to work with. And often that means, just setting up on tripod, and sometimes that's the only way to go, but sometimes it just gets in the way of efficiency a little bit. And now I find that with that amount of stabilization, I found it on mountaineering trips, for example, I can shoot handheld 30 minutes prior to what I used to do, before sunrise. And likewise, at the end of the day, I can keep shooting handheld. I can keep the tripod in the bag 30 minutes later than I used to. So that's a whole other hour that I can keep my process way, way more efficient. So this shot was taken at what I consider to be the ultimate ice rink. This is my friends Lee and Chris. And this is a feature that does not exist anymore. But like I said before, I alluded to the fact that last season we had a dream wild ice skating season. It was phenomenal. But at some point, the snow eventually came and covered all those lakes and made things pretty hopeless for us wild ice skaters. But thankfully, we knew of a location that would be immune to snowfall. And that was a perfect ice rink located inside the Saskatchewan Glacier, which is one of the most surreal locations I've ever shot or played hockey at. It was absolutely phenomenal. So we hiked, I think it's about 10K to the Saskatchewan, brought all the hockey gear, all the camera gear, and it was a highlight of the winter, I think, for the vast majority of us. I'll show you a few shots there. We stayed around till we stuck it out till nighttime, and all of those shots are shot handheld with the in-body stabilization, and I'm lying down on the ground to get the maximum reflection. And I was able to explore so many more ideas than I would have been able to in the past when I was forced to use the tripod a lot more. And here's another shot that gives you an idea of the scale of this place and just the magic. So all those are shot handheld. And this one too is shot in fairly low light. It's just, I overexposed it. I want to show you a couple more cool shots that you can take handheld now. And again, this is why those features are game changers for me. Usually in the past, when you wanted this silky flow in the water, unless you're very steady handed, which I'm not, you needed to bring the tripod everywhere and set it up. And it's, it means if you put down the pack and you set up the tripod, it means you're going to be there for a while and you're sacrificing potentially other photo ops. Those two shots just shot handheld, which is amazing, where I can get the motion that I'm after. And it's not something I would have ever considered doing in the past. And honestly, that they're pretty darn tack sharp. I can print either of those pretty darn big before you start noticing that, yeah, maybe the sharpness is not absolutely optimal. It's really, really impressive. All right, now I want to talk about the lenses a little bit. I've talked mostly about the 1535. I just want to show you some shots taken with the 7200s. So those shots are taken with either the 7200 or the RF 7200 f4 or f2.8. And I'm particularly fired up about the f4 because it's so darn small. It's sometimes you won't believe you're carrying a far-reaching telephoto full-frame system around your neck because it feels like you just have the wide angle there. It's very, very small. It's already legendary for its size. And so if you're the kind of landscape photographer who likes to get well away from the road, if you're an adventure photographer, a nighttime photographer who likes to get away from civilization, that lens is going to end up in the pack on every single trip. Whereas perhaps in the past, if you own the 7200 f2.8 EF, you might have been on the fence about, I don't know, it's pretty heavy, I might leave it behind. Now, I mean, for me, that 7200 f4 comes along on all the trips. It's a no-brainer. So I'll show you a few more shots taken with a 7200. Again, great stabilization, sharp, super small, good weatherproofing. Those are Western large trees in Kootenay National Park. This is Iceberg Lake in the foreground. Had beautiful conditions with sun on Iceberg Lake. In the meantime, the weather was absolutely nasty over Bow Lake. You can see Untitled Lodge and Bow Lake in the background. It was really, really ominous, and the timing was perfect for us with that rainbow. Couple more shots. This is Mount Willingdon. This is way in the Banff backcountry. This is taken from the summit of Dip Slope Mountain, which takes a little bit of work to get to. And that morning, I sat on the summit, and it was amazing to just swivel with the 7200 and just capture the light, which was dancing in all directions. And it was so nice to have that tool, the 7200. And I would have just been so mad at myself to only have the wide angle on that trip. So, but now it's a no-brainer to have that 7200. This is just taken basically a minute later in the opposite direction, essentially looking towards Devon Lakes and Clearwater Pass. Phenomenal conditions for those sort of compressed telephoto landscapes. Now I want to show you a few shots taken with the 100 to 500. So if you like that sort of compression effect, you're going to love the 100 to 500. I absolutely love that lens. It's actually a very reasonable size for the range that you get. It's great for wildlife. It's great when you want to really bring those successive mountain ranges all really, really closely packed together. This is my brother-in-law, Kevin, coming back down to the road from Quill Peak. And he was walking through at the bottom. You can see him there. He was walking through this amazing slice of light. And I loved how much I was able to include and how sort of how intricate the geology was and how I was able to bring that out with the 100-500. Another shot taken with the 100-500. I was walking up to that snow cave that I showed you with my daughter. And this was a very, very distant scene. Mount Babel was going off. It was just the towers on the bottom half of the mountain was coming in and out of the clouds. And it was a magical scene straight out of a fairy tale. And it was amazing to be able to shoot this scene with the 100-500 from a very, very long way away and get images and this is handheld, get images that are super tight and images that really I can output in any way that I want. If someone wants a big print, I can confidently print an image like this, quite big. One last image taken with the 100-500 of this wonderful overlap of season that we're experiencing here in the Rockies. This is taken in Kootenay National Park, where you can easily combine fall and winter in one image. And I just really, really liked the abstract feel of this one. So this is the end of the little tour of the mirrorless system that I want to show you, and the tour of the Canadian Rockies and the highlights of my photography wanderings with the mirrorless system over the last year and a half or so. Again, all of the images were taken with the R5. And now what I'd like to end with, is just, I'd like to present to you with a 5 or so minute slideshow that will show you a few more scenes, again, all captured with the R5 and the lenses that I mentioned already. And so I really hope you enjoy, and please stick around with us, because I'll be around. I've got all night, and we'll be answering any questions that you might have regarding the photos or the gear. So please stick around with us. And now we're going to move over to slideshow mode. I hope you enjoy. I'll see you after at the Q&A.
Hey, Paul, that was an amazing presentation. There are some stunning photos in there. Unbelievable. So I have a couple questions for you right off the bat. You skated 30 kilometers?
Yes, skated 30 kilometers on Abraham Lake. And I'll have to let you know, Dave, every year we do the Minnewanka Traverse, where we skate Minnewanka. The thing with Abraham is you can go one way and leave a car at the other end. You can't do that at Lake Minnewanka. When you're at the far end, you got to skate back. There's no other way. So it ends up being about a 50-kilometer event, and it's growing in size every year. It's a lot of fun. I'll let you know.
Is that like it's like a Canadian marathon there?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that actually brings me to a question here. Dylan Kaninsky asks, with wild ice season not too far away, what are the best tips to be safe and sound? I said, do you get nervous shooting on icy lakes? Have you had any close calls or cracking ice sounds?
Great question, Dylan. Good to see you here. I think, because that's the thing, I think it's important to mention the best, most photogenic ice tends to occur early season. And so that comes with some safety concerns for sure. Always recommend people go out there with life jacket, as a group, with rope. Now they sell, it's really easy to find those little hooks that dangle from your pockets, from your sleeves, sorry. So that if you fall in, you can get purchased and get back on the ice where you came from. So you can self-extract from the water. And also measuring ice, bring ice screws, be very conservative, measure ice thickness. Don't assume because there's 200 people there that the ice is thick enough, because that happened last year at Lake Louise where there were tons of people and everybody assumed that because someone else was there, and it started with 2, 4, 8 people, and eventually you end up with a lot of weight on that ice, and you realize nobody's actually taken a measurement. So bring your own gear, do your own homework, and don't rely on other people's observations, and you can have an amazing, magical winter of skating out there.
So the other thing I notice in your shots too is that you really get up into the mountains. You're not just driving to a location and getting out, walking across a parking lot. You're climbing and stuff. How much training do you have, and do you always bring like somebody as experienced as you or more experienced than you to help with?
Yes, I think given the time, I'd rather get away from the road. Now the talk, because it's about adventure photography, makes it look like everything I shoot is well away from the road. Just like the other guy, I like to do some roadside landscape stuff as well. But given the time, I'd rather be up higher in the backcountry. Sometimes I just have a morning to work with, and I'll just go shoot Bow Lake at sunrise, and that's it. And usually I get out, my ratio is half and half in terms of getting out alone versus getting out with someone else. I really like going into the mountains on my own. I find it's a totally different experience. When it comes to technical terrain, of course, you have to go with a partner. I really enjoy getting out with partners as well, and being able to just share those just incredible moments of light and incredible things that you witness with someone else. And typically, I do a bit of everything. I mean, for trickier objectives where if I went alone, I might be in over my head a little bit. I've got some friends who are wicked climbers. They know. They're really good at decision making. They're really good at dealing with all kinds of terrain. So there's some people you see in the shots who are just more advanced than me in the mountaineering world for sure. And then for more mellow objectives, there's lots of people that you saw in the shots where I'd end up as the sort of by default leader because maybe I know a little bit more about the mountains than other people. So it's a bit of a mix.
Okay. And I noticed you really use external lights a lot when you're doing your night photography to illuminate the ice and illuminate the ice caves. Do you find you like using strobes, or you like using LEDs? Are they RGBs? And how do you sort of practice that technique? Is it a little trial and error when you're working with it?
For sure. I think I really like I carry those lume cubes around quite a bit. I find that they're so easily customizable in terms of color, the amount of light. They're waterproof, they're tough, and they're lightweight. So I usually carry a couple of those when I head out on a night shoot. I often carry the flash as well because I think you can get really some effects that you saw in some of the images that you really can't get with just the sort of longer duration light sources. And so in terms of getting the effect that I'm after, it's a lot of trial and error for sure. I think the more you do it, the better you get at guessing what the best light, what the best approach is going to be the first time around. And there's less sort of testing. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't. You get more efficient for sure. But at the same time, I find that night photography, when you include secondary light sources, always means some amount of experimenting.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a couple questions here. SL Sani says, what kind of filters do you use? Do you bracket? That kind of stuff. Do you have a sort of a set technique, or kind of walk us through your process when you're walking into a scene?
For sure, I'm a serial bracketer for sure. I do. I bracket, and people laugh at my fellow photographers laugh at me for that because it's all they hear from me is the 3 shots. I'm just used to working in environments where I don't have a lot of time to work with, and I just love how the bracketing gives me that safety net in terms of making sure I get the properly exposed image. And also, if I like the fact that it gives me those extra frames. If I need to blend in post, then I have them. So I always shoot 3 times as much as my fellow photographers, but that's just part of my process now. So I bracket almost everything. In terms of filters, I never go out in the field without a 10 stop and a polarizer. So lightweight. For me, there's no reason to not go out without those filters. So they're always out there. If I'm really, really picky about weight, I might bring like just an 82 millimeter circular polarizer and 82 millimeter 10 stop. And then I'll just adapt it to my 77s if I really want to reduce weight. But those filters come with me everywhere. I love long exposures, and I work with water a lot. I love just the lakes in the Rockies, and I love to be able to bring out that color using the polarizer.
Yeah, I mean, do you ever use like the variable ND filters instead of like the solid NDs?
I did try to use the variable. I tried a couple of variable NDs. And again, there's probably some good ones out there. I'm open to your suggestions, but I found that I was just getting like the X of death, and just the weirdly uneven polarization. And so I kind of gave up on those, and I just went back to straight 10 stops because regardless, I find that usually when I want to lengthen the shutter speed, I don't want to go from like a 10th of a second to a second. Usually I want to go, 20, 30 seconds. So I rarely have a use for 1 or 5 stops anyways. Usually I want to go all the way. So I just carry the 10 stops now.
Okay. So, I mean, you deal with some really cold temperatures and stuff. Do you, have you had any sort of gear failures or have anything happen? Like how's the R5 and their lenses performed in like really cold temperatures?
Yeah, so now I've had a chance to put the R5 through one solid winter, and we had some pretty serious cold snaps.
Yeah.
And I was out there quite a bit shooting skating and ice caves and all that. I had no issues whatsoever. Just like I didn't have any issues with the 5D Mark IV. 5D Mark IV, I found sometimes would get like a tiny bit sluggish in terms of you would change the aperture. It would take more than a split second to actually show up on the display in those crazy cold temperatures, like -35, -40. The R5, my main concern was battery life, and I was actually pleasantly surprised because I heard so much about battery life and how you're going to have to carry batteries out there. And so I was a little bit, I think I dropped a little bit there. I'm still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I was concerned about how many batteries I'm going to have to carry and all that. And so I was pleased to see that I didn't have any issues with the R5, and I shot in pretty darn cold temperatures. And it's still the same old story. The photographer will fail. The photographer's body will fail before the gear does, and that's how it should be. And so usually I will give up on conditions much while, you know, and still the R5 would gladly keep shooting, but I just cannot put up with any more of the conditions.
Oh, that's good to know. And you touched on it briefly a little bit earlier with your bracketing, how you like to shoot. Now, are you how many stops each way are you bracketing?
I find that 90% of the time, one stop each way is all I need.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if I shoot like in an ice cave looking out, or, you know, some extreme contrast situations, usually I will shoot, I'll rarely go beyond 2 stops. And part of it is you can retrieve so much detail in the highlights and the shadows now in those latest camera bodies that you don't need, I think, as wide a safety net as you used to.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Guy Odette asks, what is the best time to shoot the Aspens in Abraham? Any suggestions on locations? Give us your secrets.
For the Aspen. The Aspens at Abraham. The nice thing about the Aspens at Abraham Lake and elsewhere, really, well, Abraham Lake is a big location. I mean, it's one of those locations, I think, where it's fair to say 99% of people end up in 5% of the lakeshore, but there's a lot to explore at Abraham Lake. And the Aspens don't turn all at once. They don't turn over they don't change color all in the same week. It's a process that, in my experience, spans 2 or even 3 weeks. I was there just the other day. I would say it's only just starting now, and it's probably going to. Last year, I shot really beautiful, colorful Aspens at Abraham, probably around October 8th or 10th. So it's a pretty wide window of opportunity there. And it's a location where I think a lot of people will end up, you know, on the south side because it's easier access. I was just there the other day and I found some amazing spots all along the road on the west side and even closer to the north end. Some spots where there's a lot of those trees, aspens and other types of trees that are way into the water that provide incredible photo ops that have a nice surreal feel to them because all those trees are in like, you know, a meter of water sometimes. It's a really unique location. I think it's going to see a lot of traffic this fall, but I think there's so much terrain to work with that everybody can get along and get the shots that they like.
Now, you talked about it, and I know a little bit about it, but like the methane bubbles in Abraham Lake. Can you talk a little bit more about that phenomena?
For sure. Again, I think a lot of people associate the methane bubbles with Abraham Lake. But the methane bubbles are found in, as far as I know, I think I've shot them in 10 or 15 lakes of the Canadian Rockies. So they occur in a lot of other places, particularly in those lakes that are man-made or that have been dammed, you know. So Minnewanka is phenomenal. Spray Lakes is phenomenal. So is Abraham. And they're all big lakes that offer, you know, that allow for room for tons of people to shoot the bubbles without stepping in each other's shots. The bubbles at Abraham can really occur. They form differently every year. So I would just say, go for a drive, bring the skates, and that's a great efficient way. You know, people either go with no traction whatsoever, and you can see them shuffle their feet awkwardly, or they'll go with the ice cleats, which work really well. But you can, when it comes to doing a scouting mission, I mean, you can scout out like half of Abraham Lake in just a day of skating, get some exercise, make things a little bit exhilarating. And usually I'll just mark the spots with a GPS, and the bubbles stay where they are for the winter once they formed. And so then I can it's a big lake. So sometimes you'll find features that if you didn't mark them, you go back 2 weeks later and you'd never be able to find them again. So usually I'll just go on a big scouting mission once the lake freezes, and I'll just mark, you know, I'll just do an inventory of where the cool formations are. And there's a lot more than bubbles. There's incredible array of ice formations that form at Abraham Lake besides the bubbles. So if people ever get bored with the bubbles, I mean, just go for a walk, go for a skate. There's incredible other foregrounds to work with. So and it renews itself every year, which makes things really, really exciting. You can go to Abraham every winter and always find something you've never seen before.
Great. Now, the other thing about Abraham Lake I've heard, and it happens with a lot of other lakes too, is that it gets incredibly windy when you're there. And if you're doing any kind of sort of longer exposures and you're using a tripod, do you have sort of some techniques to really help cut the wind or prevent any kind of shake? I've heard of guys chasing their tripods down the lake because they didn't anchor it down or something.
Oh, I've seen it happen. I mean, I've seen people being pushed down the lake, not just their tripod. It's pretty wild. I mean, it can gust up to 100, 120 at Abraham in the winter. It's a crazy place. And that when the ice quality is good, which usually means the bubbles are good, it's really, really hard to get purchase for your gear. A lot of people you can get some accessory like ice spikes now for the tripods. A lot of people will weigh their tripods down with their backpack, or at least try to shelter the tripod using your own body. But yeah, it can be, but the wind is a gift, it's what keeps Abraham Lake free of snow throughout the winter, whereas all the other lakes along the divide, once they're covered in snow, Bow Lake, Pedo Lake, all those lakes, Moraine, Louise, once they're covered in snow, I mean, they look the same for 6 months, whereas Minnewanka gets the winds, the Chinooks, same for Abraham, same for Spray, and that keeps them free of snow for a good chunk of the winter. So people the wind is a bit of a pain to contend with sometimes, but it's what keeps the lake really, really exciting for photographers. But yeah, people get creative. There's ways to make it work. I think, if you live anywhere close to the Rockies and you plan on spending a lot of time on lakes, invest in some traction devices for yourself and your gear, and then you just work more at ease, and yeah, you're more likely to get the images that you're after, actually go home with the gear that you showed up with.
Now, so you've switched to the R5. When you're out, do you just bring a single body, or do you run two bodies all the time?
It depends. Sometimes it's practical. If I shoot roadside, I'll have two bodies for sure, because it's easy to have the other body, even in the car, not too far. If I go in the backcountry, then it's not really practical to bring two bodies. So it's very rare I'll bring two bodies in the backcountry. Now I'm starting going to start to travel internationally for, COVID willing, for several months over the next year. And there's no way I'm going to those places with just one body. So I'll carry the body. So it's situation dependent.
Now, how have you found?
But usually the second body will also be an R5 if I've got one available.
Well, it makes sense, and it's nice to have that luxury. So,
yeah.
Now, you find how have you found switching to the whole mirrorless system as far as dealing with an electronic viewfinder? I mean, going from a traditional optical viewfinder and sort of, reviewing your shots in post, but being able, now you can see it real time in the viewfinder. Have you found that whole experience to be kind of enthralling and something unique that you've really embraced, or do you still like an optical viewfinder?
I resisted that feature initially a little bit, to be honest, because I think when it comes to transitioning from the 5D4 to the R5, that was, I guess one of the main hurdles that I had to get over in order to get really fully comfortable with the new gear. And at first, I guess it took me maybe, a couple weeks of getting out with the camera before I finally started to embrace it. And now I wouldn't go back. I think it's a fantastic tool. I'm 100% used to it. And and I'm just, I find it works really seamlessly with my workflow now.
Okay. I got a question here from Kelly Suchan, who says, I currently own the R6, and other than the megapixel difference, what would be the best reasons to upgrade to the R5?
I'll be honest with you, Kelly. Good to see you here, Kelly. I'll be honest with you, I have no experience with the R6. I haven't played with it at all. So I don't have any hands-on experience for comparison there. But I was going to say, that's the big one, is the megapixels. I think for people who like to have all outputs available to them. You've got your master TIFF file, and someone reaches out and they want a massive print of something. If it's not for everyone, it's not something that everyone needs. But if people come to me and say, I want a 24 by 36 of whatever image that you shot that I saw online, then it's so nice to be able to confidently go to them and say, yeah, I can print that for you, no problem. But I would say that's the big one. I think you've nailed it there.
Okay, and you seem
but
to.
Yeah, maybe you have something to contribute as well, Dave. I think you probably have experience with both.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, there are some advantages to the R5 with the higher resolution viewfinder, the option to go with the CF Express card type, and if you're into video, it certainly has more impressive video specs. But we can go on and on about the differences there. Kelly, if you want, feel free to email me and I'll follow up with you in a more detail. Just dave@thecamerastore.com. The other thing I was wondering about is you seem to do a lot of self-portraits, which are kind of cool because it kind of adds a nice sort of level and a personality to your photos. Do you use the intervalometer you did at the one point there? Do you use the Wi-Fi connectivity on the camera when you're out in the remote situations?
I haven't used the Wi-Fi yet. I've only relied on usually, and the reason I don't use the Wi-Fi, the two reasons. I have yet to fully embrace the feature. I'll be totally honest with you. And the other reason is over the years, I've had just so many issues with communicating between devices from a distance in different ways. And so now I like to get the camera shooting and to hear it shooting when I'm standing right next to it. And then I'll proceed to enter the frame when I know the photos are being taken. Because I've multiple times in the past, I've just walked into a scene, sometimes the fairways, and just like do all sorts of body positions and try different compositions. And then I get back to the camera and realize, I only took one shot or whatever. And then, then I was just putting a show for no reason. So I'm maybe a little bit more old school that way, but I think it's a good reminder. It's something I should look into a little more closely.
Now, you certainly rely on a tripod for certain applications, but with the handheld image stabilization, do you find yourself leaving the tripod at home a lot more?
I still carry it pretty much as I used to be honest. It's more a matter of like when I want to shoot something that requires tripod, I know it means that I'm committing in terms of time. It's not going to be a 1 minute stop. So usually I carry it everywhere because bottom line is the tripod still allows for possibilities that the stabilization is just too limited for, long exposures, night shots, etc., or the self-portraits. So I still carry the tripod everywhere, a lightweight tripod, but it stays on the bag more than it used to. And so I spend more time moving, less time just pulling it out, setting it up, doing all that stuff. So it really just makes the process more efficient. And bottom line is I go home with more shots than I used to.
Okay. And then a few more questions here, but if you had to, what's your go-to lens? I know the answer, I think, but what's your go-to body and lens combination if you had to just go out very minimalist?
No question, the R5 and the 1535. I looked through Lightroom the other day, and I used the filters to look at what I've been using for lenses over the last few years, and there's no question that the wide angle, the sort of classic Canon wide angle, whether it's when I started was the 1740 and then was 1635 and now is a 1535, probably an overwhelming number of images were taken with that lens, or version of that lens. And so there's no question that that's my workhorse. I'd say right now probably sits at 70% of my images are taken with a 1535 f2.8. It's amazing for adventure, for landscape, for Astro. I mean, it's for what I like to do. It's really the lens that really has me covered in so many situations.
All right, I got a question from Gem611 who asking, what tripod do you use for your backcountry adventures?
I use the Manfrotto B3 series.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought you'd have a bigger tripod because they're relatively small.
No. Yeah, they are small. You know, like I told you, I just got out of getting pummeled in K country and the wind was gusting to 80, 90 K, and I knew that it wasn't even worth pulling out the tripod. There's no way that I'd be able to get the sharpness that I was after. But for most purposes, yeah, it's my go-to tripod in the backcountry. It's not a huge commitment in terms of weight. Yes, sometimes if I have the tripod in a stream or if the wind is strong, then that might prevent me from shooting certain types of images. But I would say overall, I think it's a perfect compromise. So that's what I've been carrying in the field for 3-4 years now.
And the second last question here, when it comes to sort of planning your trips and your timing, are there certain apps that you use? Like how much planning do you put into setting up a shot? You've got a shot in mind and do you use Google Maps a lot? Do you have certain apps that give you the lighting to sort of plan? Or do you just kind of wing it, just kind of hang out there and go for it?
I think there's always the tools can only help you so much. I like the tools to get just a general idea of the lay of the land, the weather, the aurora forecast, the light direction. But the rest of it, I just always leave some of it to a more impromptu approach, a more spontaneous approach, because you can only figure out so much from the comfort of your home. A lot of the magic has to happen. A lot of the decision making has to happen in real time in the field. But I don't like to go in there blind. So I use photo pills quite a bit. I'm a bit of a weather nerd. I spend a lot of time looking at space weather as well as just the terrestrial weather apps. I spend a lot of time on Google Maps. I'm a map geek. I absolutely love looking at maps. So I like to know where in the journey I'm likely to be more productive so that I can see it coming. I can anticipate. I can keep my gear handy. And so, yeah, I especially on those multi-day trips, there's always some homework happening at home using all those amazing tools that we have at our disposal nowadays.
And do you find that you do a lot of multi-day trips, or can you do your day trips are more common?
Nowadays, I'd say I do more day trips. I have 2 little girls. It's a busy household. There's a lot going on. So I don't get out on multi-day trips as much as I used to. I certainly intend, as time goes by, as the kids grow up, to spend more and more time camping, staying in huts. I find it really allows for just more immersion when you're out there and you're just all of the clutter of daily life, of civilization falls away, and you can just connect with nature so much more and just really get more in the zone with what you're trying to accomplish on the photo side. And so given the choice, I'll always go on a multi-day adventure, but the reality is sometimes I only have a day to work with, and sometimes only have an hour to work with. But that's the beauty of living in or close to the Canadian Rockies. I mean, there's always amazing options, no matter the time frame that you have to work with.
All right, and so the last question for me is, I see that hockey plays a very big theme in a lot of your photos. Do you always bring along a hockey stick and a puck to all of your mountain adventures?
Yeah, those few friends that you saw, it's a given that every one of our vehicle will have pucks soon enough too, because the lakes are going to start freezing pretty quick. Pucks and a hockey stick and a couple jerseys, and sometimes the net will be in the back of a pickup truck. And that way, even if we're not necessarily planning, you never know when you're going to find good ice. It's nice to be ready, and so we usually have our go-to setup that's just going to remain in the vehicles at all times, so we can be ready to jump on an opportunity to shoot some ice and do some skating if we can.
That's fantastic. I love it. So I just want to thank you. That's been an amazing presentation. You've been a fantastic guest. So I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to thank Canon Canada for sponsoring TCSTV Live. And I also want to suggest too that there is the Canon road trip going on. If you want to try out some of the latest Canon R gear, check out canonroadtrip.ca for all the information there where you can join and participate. A reminder that if you haven't registered for this event, you can still email Evelyn at thecamerastore.com and she's going to send you the promotions that we can't talk about online. And we have a lot more events coming up to celebrate our 25th anniversary. And if you like what you saw, please subscribe and let us know what you thought of this. We'd love to hear from you. We really do appreciate the feedback, and we'll catch you again soon.